Given your working definition of truth, and let's say within the Abrahamic religious tradition, would you say that the more perhaps mystical sects and denominations which place more emphasis on the transcendental experience of God, of the awe-induced experience, as opposed to the more fundamentalist, orthodox, literalist, which perhaps emphasize what I've noticed, moral policing of behaviors?
Yep.
Would you say that the former is more true than the latter?
No.
No.
Okay, sorry, continue.
And B, could the former in some way serve as an antidote to extremist literalism, jihadism, fundamentalism?
Okay, so yes to the second part. But the first part, it's a great question. We did some research on this a while back because we were looking at the different religious proclivities of liberals and conservatives. And liberals, like if you're liberal, it means you're high in openness and low in conscientiousness. And if you're conservative, then you're high in conscientiousness and low in openness. And the liberals are spiritual and the conservatives are dogmatic. But it's best to think of those as partners, right? Because the spiritual, mystical end is where the revelations emerge and the renewal, but that's where there's chaos and discord as well. Because what's new disrupts what's stable. And so what's new has to be turned into, it has to be integrated into what's stable. And so you need both those poles. And of course, if the dogmatists get the upper hand, then everything turns into a tyranny of stone. That's Egypt in the Old Testament. But if the mystics get the upper hand, then everything floats off the earth into some impractical ether that is equally counterproductive. And so there has to be a dialogue between those different poles. And I think you see that in the distribution of human temperament. You know, the conscientious types, they tend to be orderly. The orderly types tend towards the kind of a right-wing totalitarianism. That's their proclivity when things get out of hand, especially if they're low in openness. That's a danger. But you see the same thing with the people who are too open and not conscientious at all. They're dreaming all the time, but they never do anything. There's never anything implemented, and that's a bad thing. So I don't think that you can say that like the dogmatic structure is necessary because that perpetuates the system. And the revelatory element is necessary because that renews it when renewal is necessary. And there has to be a continual dialogue between those elements so that neither of them fall prey to their own particular form of pathology. And that's one of the problems with the current political polarization that's occurring across the West, is that the right and the left are not talking to each other anymore. That's a very bad thing because the left will wander into a pit and fail without boundaries, and the right will enclose itself in smaller and smaller spaces until it can't move without the left. And one of the reasons that democracy works is because it makes people talk, or allows them to talk. You can have it either way. But it's because every virtue has its vice, right? And a meta-virtue is something like the amalgamation of singular virtues into something that's a transcendent structure that has more to do with the harmony of virtues rather than with any given virtue. Even though I think that freedom of speech is the clearest manifestation of that harmony of virtues. So
awe could be a lubricant for the beginning of this discussion, do you think, between liberals and conservatives?
I don't know how to answer that. It doesn't follow immediately from your initial presupposition, so the awe experience is a different issue.
It's exposing conservatives to some form of that experience. Could it be a prerequisite for a more productive dialogue?
See, I mean, in the church, in a church ceremony, let's say, a classical church ceremony, there's some intermingling of both, right? I mean, you think about a church ceremony that takes place in a Gothic cathedral. Well, you certainly got the dogma and the relatively rigid rule structure, but at the same time, that's aligned with intense beauty in the architectural forms, in the light that's streaming in through the stained glass windows, and the music. And I mean, the Gothic cathedral is a forest, right? It's a stone forest with sunlight streaming in through the trees. And it's a balance between structure and light. They're absolutely unbelievable structures. And they speak of the transcendent, but but inside that there's a structure. And so it seems that in order for the religious impulse to be balanced properly, there has to be a reasonable dialogue, even in practice, between the mystical, awe-inspiring, transcendent, and the dogmatic. Yeah, either of those can go as either of those goes astray without the other. If you're too dogmatic, do you need awe? Likely. Yes, because that would show you that there's something beyond your own presuppositions.